so she's running to us, and she finally gets close, and we can hear what she says, and she goes, "There's poop everywhere!" We're going to go back into the parable because, like I said, Jesus explains it. So we would have just read the parable, and now we're going to see what he says about the first kind of ground. We're going to skip to verse 14. He says, "The seed the farmer plants is God's message. What is seed scattered on a path like? The message is planted. The people hear the message. Then Satan comes. He takes away the message that was planted in them." So right away, Jesus makes it clear that this seed that is going out, the metaphor of the seed is God's message. It's what God is trying to communicate. So it's not just what Jesus was saying, but it is actually Jesus himself. He is the message. And so we can think about that when we think about what we're receiving as God's message. And then Jesus goes on to talk about this first type of ground, and he calls it a path. And so you can imagine that like a dirt path that is hard, it is compact, it is solid. And so the seed hits it, it kind of stays on the ground, it doesn't really get to absorb, and the birds come along and eat it. That's what it says. And so Jesus explains that the birds, the metaphor there, is that Satan immediately grabs the message away before it has chance to take root in our lives. So for some of us here, we might sense that the ground that we are experiencing right now is an impenetrable path. We might feel like our ground is an impenetrable path, like something is blocking us from receiving what God has for us. Maybe you felt that way before, where all you want is to hear from God, and yet it just feels like you're not hearing it, that nothing is sinking in. Or maybe you feel like you know what the message God is saying, but it's a hard one to hear. And so you kind of block yourself off from it and not let it sink in. You come to church, you put yourself in places where you can hear the seed, like it said in Jesus's words, but maybe you hear it, but then you easily forget it or you ignore it. Sometimes our ground is like that. And I think everyone in this room, at times, we have been that, where it just is a hard path and the message isn't getting in. And sometimes what causes that in us is bitterness, or sometimes resentment, sometimes regret can do that, where we close ourselves off to God. And if that is you, then chances are you've got to do a little bit of work to kind of break up that hard ground. Have you ever seen a big field of grass that has been aerated? That's where they go and they kind of poke all these holes in it. And this is what they do in the grass when it's gotten so compact and hard that it can't absorb even water or nutrients. And so they go through and they kind of dig it up a little bit. And I know that almost looks like it causes more damage, like the grass looks worse right after that. But what it does is it frees up, it breaks up that hard ground to be able to receive what the grass needs. When our kids were little, we went into SF and we went to Washington Square, and we had them they wanted to just run around. Our older was probably 7, and just kind of run around. And so they were way over on the far side. We were over by the church, they were over there, and they get far, far away from us. And suddenly Quinn, our older daughter, she turns to us and has a panicked look on her face. And she starts beelining it back to where we are, and she's yelling something. We can't hear what she's yelling, but she looks so freaked out. Well, this grass, all of the grass had been aerated. And we knew that. We're looking at it. And the thing that happens when it gets aerated is sometimes it just like they poke the holes. But a lot of times what they do is they almost like pull a plug of soil out. And then they just leave it laying there all around. And then it kind of reabsorbs. So just to give you a visual, this is what it looked like all over this grass. And so finally, she's running to us, and she finally gets close and we can hear what she says, and she goes, "There's poop everywhere!" Like she just thought they let the dogs loose and they just all pooped over all the grass. And we knew, of course, that this was what was good for the grass. And what was really happening is the hard, unreceptive ground was getting broken up. For some of us in here, we need our ground to get aerated. If you feel like God's message to you is not sinking in, I think the thing for you that's going to break that up has to start with self-examination. You've got to look inward. You've got to be able to have the honesty and the humility to recognize what is it in your life that's causing it to be hard and unresponsive. And maybe for you, a next step for you this week is, well, first of all, I'd say if you weren't here last week, go back and listen to Josh's message last week because it was very much about that. But I think if you could this week take time to really recognize and try to identify, are there some habits in your life or some sin or something that you are holding on to that is making it so hard for you to receive what God has for you? And if you do that, I am so confident that you are going to receive such a warm and welcomeness of grace from God. You know, we often don't do that because we feel like we're going to feel even more shame and we're going to feel guilt, but God is so abundantly generous with us. So I hope that if that's you, you'll be able to do that this week.